Nobody knows. But we can say a lot about learning even though we have no idea how people learn. And the reason we don't know is the brain is close to infinitely complex, and it will probably be thousands of years before we know how exactly it works. But here's the point that is really a value to know, and that is learning should proceed in a certain sequence. And that is, we need to take information into the brain, then we need to compare it with the information we already have, and then we need to create something new. And once we've created that new thing, we need to do something with it. So that's what we call the learning cycle. And all students should be learning in those three stages, but by and large, we're using rote learning when we should be using something else. So let me say what I mean by that. When you learn the multiplication tables, you don't want to have to think about them each time that you figure out what 9 times 5 is. So rote learning is very important for things like that. And that means simply that it's memorized in such a way that you never have to think about it. The answer just comes very, very quickly. Other kinds of learning, however, the learning that involves problem solving, the ability to deal with new and previously inexperienced things, is very complex and means that we have to develop a process in the mind for doing something new and different every time. And that's what makes us unique. In fact, all creatures on Earth learn, and they all confront new and different things from time to time. And so they have to adapt. And human learning is extremely adaptable, and we want to keep it that way. But unfortunately, when we confuse all learning with rote learning, we make it less and less adaptable. And I want to tell a story about that. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, did a study of physics teaching in Brazil. And he found out that in Brazil they do an absolutely perfect job of teaching physicists physics in such a way that they can never do anything with what they know. And he did find 2 physicists in Brazil who could do physics, but they had been trained in a different country. And so there's an example of the problem, the extreme form of the problem. What we want to do is liberate most learning from the obligation to look as if it's supposed to be memorized. The way that we teach is determined by the fact that back in the Middle Ages, books were very expensive. They were as expensive as very expensive automobiles are today. And because books were so expensive, you went to the university to hear lectures so you wouldn't have to read the books because you couldn't get the books. And we still use that system today, even though books are plenteous and widely available. We stand up and talk to people about things that people should be able to just read. And so the result is that people are being exposed to ideas that are not in the context of what they want to learn about, and they're expected to remember stuff that is not particularly meaningful to them or related to their personal experience in any way. And as a result, the majority of students don't like school very much. They don't want to learn that way. And in addition to that, we have many different learning styles and many different intelligences. People who learn kinesthetically, for example, need to experience an idea in their bodies before they can get it. So if you sit in a chair and listen to a lecture, and the lecturer talks about something, because you have no experience of it in your body, you have no idea what's going on, and you feel like you're not very smart, and you don't want to be there. As a result, we have a bell curve which really measures the people who are comfortable learning by listening to lectures. And that's a very small percentage of the population, and those are the ones that do well academically. The rest of the students have trouble. If we were to teach in such a way that we appeal to all the intelligences and all the learning styles consistently, everybody would learn, and there would be no such thing as a bell curve in learning. But because we think in terms of tradition rather than science, we have an educational system which does not teach the majority of the students. And this is causing us to pay a very, very high price right now because we're not getting the scientists and we're not getting the other highly trained and thoughtful people that we need to run our society. So the price of not thinking about learning and not adapting our teaching to what we know scientifically about learning is excruciatingly high, and we desperately need to do something about that on a national scale. The reason people are afraid around learning is that there's a heavy emphasis on getting all the answers right, and nobody gets all the answers right, and sometimes they're penalized. In fact, usually they're penalized for wrong answers. And because it's perfectly natural in real life to get lots and lots of wrong answers and learn from your mistakes, but it's not okay in school, there's a disconnect between school and real life. And so people feel like they're in an artificial environment which is punishing them in a way that the rest of their life doesn't punish them. And if we recognize that mistakes are very valuable in learning because we can learn from our mistakes, we can learn by correcting our mistakes, then learning would be lots of fun. I don't want to say that's the only thing that causes fear, but I think it's probably 90% of the source of fear. So if we consistently taught in such a way that we learned from our mistakes, we praised people for being willing to make mistakes and take a risk, and we showed them how to work through the mistake, and everybody had fun doing that, then there probably would be no fear in the classroom most of the time. The rest of the fear that's there probably stems from the fact that a person has had, at some point, a very unpleasant experience in a classroom, in a school situation, and they haven't gotten over it, and they need to process that in some way in order to get over it. What causes students to feel stupid is they can't answer all the questions, and they feel like they're being pitted against each other, and there's some sort of a contest. And if you have 25 students in the classroom, only one can be the best, and everybody else has to feel stupid by comparison. But unfortunately, we don't know which one is the best, and so everybody feels stupid by and large. I have found that very, very brilliant adults who have done very well in school often feel stupid for that reason, because they've been in situations where they don't feel that they've really mastered everything they're supposed to master. And the whole point of going to school is so you can learn to master these things, not so that you have mastered them. And so it's completely ridiculous to do things in school that make people feel stupid. But because everybody who teaches has been through that experience too, they think that's the way to teach, so they do to their students what was done to them. When I became a teacher, I resolved that I would never, in the history of my teaching, ever do anything to my students that was done to me. When I taught at the Sidwell Friends School, I had very, very brilliant students. In fact, in one class, about half of my students ended up getting merit scholarships later. And so I gave a lot of A's because those students did brilliant work. I was criticized in the faculty meeting for giving so many A's. And then they asked, what was I teaching? And I told them, and they said, you shouldn't be teaching that until graduate school. So I was giving them A's for teaching them stuff that should be taught in graduate school, and they were able to do it, and I was criticized because I gave so many A's. That's the logic that people have. They run by the bell curve rather than by the real quality of what's happening in the classroom. Now, if we want to eliminate the bell curve, then we teach to all 9 intelligences in every classroom, and what happens is all the students can do all the material, and quite rightly they would all get A's because they can do A work. Now, if an A isn't good enough because the work isn't hard enough, then create a situation in which the work is up to the standard and teach everyone how to meet that standard and give them all A's. That's what we should be doing because we need highly educated people. So let's educate them and stop comparing and contrasting in such a way that we're determined to make some of them fail.